Luis, do you want to go ahead and get started? Do you want to give me a sign, or should I count down? All right.
Well, Sal just left. But
yeah, I'll get to it when we do a roll call. Hopefully he'll rejoin us then. So the ceremonial quote is, "The great aim of education is not knowledge, but action," by Herbert Spencer. And so now I'd like to go ahead and get started on the roll call. And I'm just going to go down the list. And if I mispronounce your name, please correct me as you confirm that you're able to be heard. Abina?
Here.
Thank you. Annie?
Here.
Thank you. Brian?
If it's Brian Weems, here.
Yes, thank you. Charan?
Here. Yeah, that's the correct pronunciation. Thank you.
Okay, Charan.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Trustee Campbell?
To unmute. I'm here.
Great, thank you. Trustee Jones?
Here.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth?
Here.
Thank you. Ganesh?
Here.
Thank you. Glynis?
Here.
Thank you. Gregory from staff?
Here.
Thank you. Jasmine?
Here.
Thank you. Jenny?
Here.
John Roberts? John?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay,
I'm here.
great. Thank you. Joyce Raykar?
Here.
Kevin Goyle?
Here.
Thank you. Lisa Moore from staff? We'll go ahead and skip. Malcolm?
Present.
Thank you. Marie?
Here.
Thank you. Martha Krieger?
I'm here.
Thank you. Michael Stasio?
I'm here.
Thank you. Noshin Eula?
Here.
Thank you. Priya?
Here.
Salvador Herrera?
Present.
Thank you. Samantha? Samantha
Here.
Chan. Okay, thank you. And Ty Lee?
Yeah.
Present.
All right, thank you. So that's roll call. And I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. Admittedly, I am less familiar with Google Meet, so I will have to figure out the voting mechanism. But for now, a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Great, so that's Annie moving. Do I have a second? I thought I saw Jasmine. Jasmine, were you seconding? Great, so Jasmine seconding. And now let's explore how to vote. I guess, let's see.
Hey, Antonio, there's a chat feature at the top. You
Yeah.
might be able to do it through the chat.
I mean, that's going to be. All right, let's try that for now, because the problem is I only see 9
so
of
I
you.
can.
Elizabeth, can you assist me on this?
Will do.
Thank you.
Did you see mine?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So I'll
Okay,
take the
okay.
yeses and nos at the same time.
I apologize. Technology question. How do I access the chat? I am on an iPad.
That is a great question that unfortunately I'm unable to answer.
Does another member know?
Do you
I believe
see?
you can on the bottom when you click on it. You should see, I think it's on the left-hand side, the 3 dots for more options.
Thank you. I see that now. I'm going to hit in call messages, and I think that I'm in the right place. There we go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, wait. So if you guys go to the bottom, if you all go to the bottom, those 3 dots next to present now, and you click those three dots and you go to change layout and you go to tiled. Let me know if I should repeat. Let me try that again for people. The three dots that are next to present now, you click on those. If you go to change layout,
I do not have that feature, so I assume that probably only folks on laptops see that option.
yeah. And we'll make sure we are able to let you fully participate in another way. If you go to tiled and you move it up to 30, at least for me, it's going to be beneficial if people could turn on their videos when we vote. So I could take raises of hands, because I don't know that chat will be effective moving forward. All right, but for now, so I see no nos, so the ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted as is. Now I'll entertain a motion to adopt the meeting minutes from the September 24th meeting. If I could ask people to try to turn on their video in order to vote. So I'll give people an opportunity to do that.
So moved.
Great. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great, thank you. And so the motion is to adopt the meeting minutes as presented in Exhibit A. I will take the ayes. Please raise your hand if you're voting in favor. If you're unable to use the video, that's totally fine. Then please put your vote in the chat. And I will do a recount if it gets close. Okay, now I'll take if everybody could put their hands down. Now I'll take the nays. All right, and if people who were not able to share their video could write their vote in the chat within the next, let's say 15 seconds. Okay, all right. Thank you. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted. And now if I could ask everybody to move to Exhibit B. So the reason I added this exhibit is in large part because not everybody is familiar with Robert's rules, but I want to ensure that everybody feels empowered to be a member of this committee and to move this body to action. And so I wanted to go over some of the very simple motions that people make. Generally, what you have to do is line up in queue. I'll have to keep a line. We used to be able to do it on Zoom, like the names would pop up, but I don't know that Google has that functionality. So you'll raise your hand and I'll have an order, right? And then in that order, you can start, either debate, discussion, or move for something. So for example, if one of you wanted to move for a recess, you'd raise your hand. I would call, call on you. And then once you have recognition, you would say, I move that we recess until 8 p.m. Right, so that's an example. So I'll just go over the key highlights. Point of privilege. So for example, I believe Annie used that to some degree because they were unable to fully participate in the meeting, right, because of technology. And so they could, it's a way to voice your complaints about not being able to fully participate. If we were in a meeting room and it was far too hot, you can make a point of privilege. Another one is ending debate. Let's say we've been discussing something and we think we've heard enough debate. You can get in line once you're recognized. Then you can move to close debate or move the previous question. I'll honor it, in whatever way it's said. Amending a motion. I think we saw that at the last meeting, right? So, we had a motion on the table and then somebody wanted to amend a part of it. So then you adopt that amendment and then you move to the main motion. And the way to do that is I move that this motion be amended by inserting X language and removing Y language. So that's an example. how to make a motion. You say, I move that, right? So you raise your hand, you get recognition once it's your turn, and then you move for something. If you object to how the procedure is being run under Robert's rules, you can point of order. And that one you can't interrupt the speaker, right? The others you have to get recognition in line. And the other ones that I would draw attention to is a point of information when you're requesting information, or a parliamentary inquiry. Let's say you're not clear on what it is we're voting on, right? So that will allow you to kind of skip the queue for those kinds of questions. But otherwise, that's why we have the queue. Okay, so I hope that's just a rough idea to hopefully, and obviously we all learn from kind of doing it. So we can move to the next item. Do we have any questions? For questions, I guess, because we don't have the raised hand, you may need to turn on video to raise your hand. Alternatively, please put in the chat if you're not being recognized by the chair. That would really help me. Okay, I see no questions in the videos and I don't see anything in the chat. So I think we can move on. So now we're at an action item where we adopt certain rules that are more specific than what Robert's rules have. So I would ask that people limit their comments to 2 minutes per speaker, right? Robert's rule says you get 10. I don't think that would necessarily benefit this group. And then only one substantive motion per place in queue. So you raise your hand. If you recall at the last meeting, for example, I believe like Malcolm and Samantha both had, I allowed them to make 2 motions. We're going to limit it to 1 motion per line in queue. If you want to make another motion, raise your hand after you're done, and then you can join the queue, assuming there's time permitting. So I'll entertain a motion to adopt these task force rules. Samantha, are you making the motion? And then is that Michael or John? Okay, oh, right here. Okay, so Samantha moved and John Roberts seconded. They did so by raising their hands. All right, so now if I could ask people to please turn on your videos so that we can vote. The motions are to adopt the task force rules of 2 minutes per speaker and 1 substantive motion per place in queue. If the ayes could go ahead and vote by raising their hand. Okay, please put hands down. And if the noes could vote by raising their hands. And I see some people don't have videos on, so if you could use the chat to vote, I'll give it another 10 seconds. Thank you, Kevin. All right, so the ayes have it. That was unanimous. And now we can move to a discussion item. So it's just a second, let me put on the timer. So this is a discussion on the role of the district in data facilitation. And I prefaced this conversation with Greg, and so I was hoping I would give some context and background, and maybe even invite like facilitators of other sub-task forces to address this and give Greg an opportunity to respond. First of all, I'd like to thank Greg and Brian Kilgore for sending me the crisis response handbook. I think what motivated this item was the mental health sub-task force asked for an item from the district. It was rejected. The request for information was rejected twice. And then we had to make a public records request for the crisis response handbook. The reason for that information is so that we could determine, in what way law enforcement officers were involved in responding to a crisis. Plus, given that the mental health report talks about 5150 assessments, we definitely wanted to be able to review what the current protocols in the district were about that. And so I suppose my position would be that I would kindly ask the district to do what it can to facilitate requests, especially for information that's readily available. But we totally understand that based on capacity restraints and the amount of work that the district has, obviously attending to distance learning and all other matters, that they may need to prioritize certain requests. But when it comes to matters that are freely available, I would ask that the district facilitate sharing of that data and not require a public records request to obtain it, because it's key for us to have information in order to properly assess the SRO program. Greg, do you want to go ahead and speak?
Yes, thank you for giving me that opportunity. And the reason why that one was out, crisis handbook is staff protected. It is under the staff resources for all of our educators in FUSD. It's on their Google Drive. And then some of the other data that you might request from me is we don't have, and particularly with the police data. We are not record keepers of the police data. That is done by the police department. So some of the information that has been requested, I physically do not have when we talk about some of the situations where we had some SROs who might have had a contact with the student for a variety of reasons, either being a victim or a suspect of something. That is not captured anywhere in our student information system. That is strictly on the police department's records. So some of the records I physically do not have, nor can I get it. We would have to put a records request into the Fremont Police Department. And also, there was a request for suspension and expulsion data. The 2019-2020 data is not posted on DataQuest's website yet. So that means that we have submitted our end of it with technology. But right now, I believe the state is probably still verifying that information. And the 1920 school year still is not posted for any district in California. That's why when I submitted that request to Mr. Burbick Herrera, it did not include the 2019-2020 school year because it's just not posted yet. And I will say that even when we get that, that is going to be skewed a little just because we went shelter in place on March 13th. So we're going to miss, roughly 3 months of the springtime where a lot of discipline did not occur that we normally see during the springtime.
Wonderful, thank you. Do you recommend that we start making requests of the Fremont Police Department directly and not have to use the Fremont Unified as a liaison for any such requests that would advance our review?
I think that's probably better. That way we don't have another hurdle that sometimes I'm busy answering emails or doing home visits, so I don't get my emails. So it'd be preferred if you went directly to the Fremont Police Department.
Awesome, thank you. We have 2.5 minutes, and Joyce is in line.
Hi, Greg. This is Joyce Recar. I'm curious as to why the school district wouldn't keep tandem records on interactions with students and our SROs, since it's most likely it's happening on our campus. And so all the other things that happen to our students are recorded or in their file, or so I'm curious why that's not a tandem record keeping.
I could check to see if there's any ed code that specifies that, Ms. Ricard. I would not prefer to put police interactions in our student information system. I think that might hurt students in some cases. I know the Comment app has just come out. They used to ask questions if you've been suspended during your high school years. That is no longer a question being asked. And I think that's the right thing to do. So I don't know if I'm comfortable by adding stuff in student information system about a student's interaction with the police officers. I just don't know if I agree with that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm not for or against it. I was just surprised that it's not part of, since it's happening on our campus and there are students, and when SRO is on our campus, like a counselor is on our campus or a teacher's on it, there's data that is connected to the interaction, whether it's, anyway, I was just super surprised and curious. So thank you.
Joyce, while I share your sentiment, just in order for us to be able to, move the media along, if we could make questions, receive the responses, we could potentially even take some conversations to the chat But also it's being, these conversations are being discussed at the sub-task force levels. So I'll just recognize the next person in the queue. The one point I did want to make sure, Priya, can you confirm that you were able to take notes? Unfortunately, we don't actually have an elected secretary, but since you were kind enough to take notes for the last meeting, are you able to take notes for this meeting?
Yeah, I can take notes.
Thank you so much. Sal, I saw your, and we have 11 seconds, so if you could close us out.
No, I'm good. I just wanted to note that there's so many informal interactions that happen between SROs and students that, tracking it would be a nightmare.
Awesome. Thank you, Sal. And so just so we can benefit, so just like a framing, at the last meeting, we would just kind of take everybody in queue, but we have exhausted the 7 minutes, right? So unless someone extends the time to discuss this, we then move to the next item, right? So just want to remind people, and if there's an open item if there's a motion on the floor, then we immediately close debate and we start actually voting on that item. If there's an amendment, we vote on the amendment and then we vote on the main motion. So just wanted to realign everybody because that's, how Robert's Rules works. And so we have exhausted our time on the role of district and data facilitation. So seeing no motions to extend time, or Samantha, are you raising your hand? Go ahead, you're on mute.
Okay. Sorry, it's like I'm having trouble working with Google Meet. But I'd like to motion to extend just because having been part of the data, do I just say that and not add any information?
Yeah, you just move for how much time you want to extend.
I moved to extend for
By how much
2
time?
minutes.
2 minutes. Do we have a second?
Yes.
Great, so Malcolm seconds. If you could turn your videos on, please. All right, all in favor of extending this discussion by 2 minutes, please raise your hands. Thank you. Put your hands down, please. All opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Go ahead, Samantha.
I just want some clarification since the data team did experience some, we're very grateful for Greg's responses. I understand we're very busy, but we really didn't have a lot to work with because we didn't know where to get the data, specifically FPD data. So if you could give us some direction on who we can specifically contact. I am hesitant to just solely rely on public records requests because we're on such a tight time frame. So if there's someone we can reach out to directly to get that data in an expedited form, that would be amazing.
What I could offer, Mr. Berber Herrera, is I will give you Sergeant Rodriguez's information, and then if you could share that with the data team, we'll go that route. Sergeant Rodriguez is my main contact with the Fremont Police Department.
Yeah, and all I would ask is that you relay that same point to Sergeant Rodriguez, since we are evaluating the SRO program. If they could facilitate courtesy requests instead of, having us resort to public records requests, that would be very helpful. Seeing no one else. Okay, Malcolm.
Are we going to leave it up to individual members of the task force to email Sergeant Rodriguez, or are we going to consolidate a list of questions? So we give him one compendium, and if so, how do individual task force members submit their questions?
And Greg, I believe you mentioned that you would be relaying this information to the data task force since they are tasked with finding information. So I would leave that, determination, Malcolm, to the data sub task force to sort out. And we have 13 seconds. I did see Annie wanting to speak in the chat.
Yeah, I'll make it super quick. I just want to emphasize the importance of objective numerical data because I'm under the assumption that I think we all want to do a good, solid, and factual job. Oh my gosh, I cannot words right now. Reviewing the SRO program, and I really hope that we can get numerical objective data as fast as possible so we can make an informed decision.
And thank you. Sal, in order for you to speak, do you want to move to extend time?
I'd like to extend time for 5 seconds. I just wanted to.
So without objection, I'll take that. Any objections? All right, great. Go ahead.
I would recommend, like I mentioned in our previous meetings, having Sergeant Rodriguez join us at our next meeting. I think not only will the questions that are given to him prior from the data team, I think it'd be also appropriate for him to be part of this conversation, because as we've seen, questions and answers lead into more questions.
You tricked me, Sal. I didn't put a timer on it. All right, thank you very much, Sal. All right, so now we can go ahead and move to receiving an interim update on information requests. And I believe this was provided to us by Greg, courtesy of the Fremont Police Department. So if we move to the exhibit on additional materials, which is at the very end of our agenda packet. Greg, did you want to walk us through any responses? I know you received them and forwarded them on. Do we want to just open it up to wider discussion, assuming people have read them?
Yeah, because like I said, these were the Fremont PD's answers, and I directly forwarded them to you. So I could do my best to ask for clarifying questions that might arise from this. But these are Fremont PD's answers.
Great, thank you. So I would direct people to the additional materials tab, and we have 10 minutes to discuss or act on the responses to these questions. And they were able to write responses to many of the questions that we posed to them. And so I would ask you to review. And if we would like to discuss, or otherwise, we can go ahead and move on to the next topic if there is no questions, actions, or debate. But otherwise, I would encourage people to review it. Since it seems like maybe we didn't have the time I did add it, yesterday. So I don't expect necessarily people to have been able to see it. So why don't I give everyone 2 minutes to review these responses, and then we'll open it up for discussion or questions.
Sal, I just saw your question. I don't know. Just thought I'd answer it quickly. It's in the agenda at the very bottom.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
I posted it in the chat.
It's the last exhibit to the agenda, so. Another minute 5, and then we'll go ahead and open discussion. Thirty seconds. All right. So that makes for the 2 minutes. So by way of example, there's 2 people who requested sharing access. So that would be kind of a point of personal privilege. You don't have access to the agenda materials because you'd like to see them from another account. So I'm trying to load that. So I'm working on giving you access to that. I know I have Annie in the queue. Go ahead, Annie.
Yeah, just reading through the questions and answers, if I'm understanding them correctly, a few were a bit concerning for me, including when we had asked for some high-level data about demographics of students. It seems like that data is not collected, or they would have given it to us, saying that they would need to figure that out. I think that was a little bit concerning, and regardless of what this task force comes up with, it should probably keep that demographic high level data. And then the last 2 questions about crisis, we were asking about crisis prevention training, and the answer was that SROs are trained in crisis intervention training, which intervention and prevention are 2 different things. So that leads me to believe that in certain instances, especially when students are experiencing crises, it might be more logical to have other types of trained professionals be the primary adult interacting with that student, as opposed to an SRO who is primarily trained to do different things.
Thank you. Samantha.
I was also looking at the point of historical data, and coupled with the fact that FUSC doesn't carry data or collect data on these incidences, there are some blind spots that that are picking in my head, such as differently abled status, socioeconomic status, that I believe the district would know. And so I think that is very important information for us to analyze the impact of this program on specific student groups.
And Malcolm, I thought I saw you raise your hand. You can raise your hand and I'll note you in the queue, and then we'll go until we exhaust. So I saw Brian and now Ganesh. Marie, just 1 second. Okay. Go ahead, Malcolm.
Thanks. I was looking at the question regarding does FUSD have a written policy on when staff can involve SROs for interactions with students? The response is please refer to Greg Bailey. I wonder if Greg's got any comment.
Yes, right now we don't have any policies or procedures when SROs are working with students on our campuses. It's strictly up to the site administrator if they would like that officer to be involved or not.
Thank you. Brian Weems?
Yes, both questions from Annie and Samantha, I believe we answered that in the security task force last week.
Thank you. That would be a good time to discuss that when we're adopting the campus security report, because there will be time for discussion. So that would be beneficial for the public. We have 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Ganesh, and then I have Marie, and then I have Trustee Campbell.
Yeah, I had a similar question to what Malcolm brought up. So I believe Malcolm asked about written FUSD policy involving SRO interactions with students, and Greg responded to that. But there was another one. Do we currently have written policy for SRO interactions? Are parents contacted when students are arrested by an SRO? And again, it's said to refer to Greg. So very similar question to what Malcolm was asking. Do we have?
No, we don't have any written policies, what SROs, how they handle situations, who they contact. That's amongst the principal, assistant principals, SROs, and sometimes counselors who refer SROs as well.
So apologies, just as a correction, there is a board policy on contacting parents after an arrest, but not during interviewing, Ganesh. And we can discuss that in the interactions report section. And I now have Marie. Sorry, Marie, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. My question is about the Fremont Police Youth Academy. It's being presented here as part of something that SROs do, but my understanding is that's a completely different program funded from a completely different source. So could we get some clarity on that? Not necessarily right now, but could that be an action item for the committee?
Clarity on the funding source or?
The Fremont Police Youth Academy, is that something that SROs do as part of their SRO duties? Or is that something they do through the police department?
Thank you, Marie. And I will move to Desiree. So Priya, if you could write that down, and then moving forward, I'll just take kind of hands to get a temperature if this is something that other people would like to know. For this first time, I won't, but that way, we can kind of test the priorities of the task force to make sure that it's a wide felt request. Otherwise, data can take that upon themselves to, collate, et cetera, and process. Go ahead, Trustee Campbell.
I just have a really quick question. Who came up with the questions? Was it what? Because I just don't know who came up with the questions.
No problem. So I can respond to that. If you refer to the minutes of our last task force meeting, information requested from Greg, that is a section in the minutes. So Greg connected with the Fremont Police Department to answer many of those questions. There are a few that remain outstanding, but for the most part, they're faithful to the request that we made at the last meeting.
I understand that, but I'm just trying to figure out from the team, from the task force, did the task force come up with the questions? Not the answers, the questions themselves.
Yes, and if you refer to the minutes in Exhibit A, you'll see our questions listed out.
Okay, was it one of the sub-task force, or was it that everybody on the committee came up with a question?
Correct. So that was from the September 28th meeting. We've exhausted time. Priya, are you looking to extend time? We can barely hear you.
Sorry, I couldn't answer this question, but I think you answered it.
Okay, so we have now exhausted the time for this item, and we can go ahead and move on to the discussion and action section. Sorry. And so I would like to now turn it over to campus security, just for some background. So over the course of these past few weeks, I think around 2 weeks, we at the September 28th meeting, we split up the task force into 4 sub-task forces to address the topics of campus security, mental health, data, and interactions. And we empowered those sub-task forces to explore anything within their scope related to the SRO program. And we also asked them to write reports that they would present to the wider task force for adoption. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to, and I was able to connect with the facilitators from the sub-task forces as well as the report writers. And I encourage them to, find someone to present the information. After they briefly present, I asked them to keep their presentations to around 10 minutes. Then that opens it up to wider discussion, potential debate, and for us to adopt the report as written. So first, I'm going to move to campus security, and that would be Marie.
Okay, so the campus security subcommittee was able to meet one time. This report is more of a transcript of what we did. If you look at our next steps, you can see that we still have research to do. We've done some research since we met, which makes some of the sections of the report need to be revised. So I just want people to be clear about that. The first thing we did is we defined what is campus security. And our definition is that it's a combination of physical safety, mental well-being, and freedom from fear. And that students should be able to attend school and, do the things that they do, go to classes, et cetera, without, worrying about their physical safety or, being afraid.
And Maria, apologies before you continue. So if people could refer to Exhibit C of their agenda packet, and then I'll ask the presenters if they would like me to share screen for the benefit of others, but you should have this information in your agenda packet.
Yeah.
So would you like to speak freely? Would you like me to present the information? Let me know.
Well, Yeah, I'm going through the report, but I don't want to
Okay,
just
great.
read it.
Okay,
So
great.
if a lot of people aren't looking at it, then you should share your screen. So then we looked at who provided it, and we started with the non-SROs. And we went through nurses, janitors, counselors, campus supervisors, and teachers and administrative staff. And if you look at the report, we just have a couple notes about how they provide safety and some issues that came up. So as an example, for counselors, we were told by the middle school principal on our committee that they have one counselor per 1,000 students, but according to the American School Counselor Association, you should have one per 250. So those are the kinds of things we've noted in the report. And then and we talked a little bit about mental health resources and counselors. We talked a lot about that. And we talked a little bit about the fact that there are programs that the different schools have, but it comes out of discretionary funds. And so it's a little haphazard. And then then we talked about what makes campuses unsafe. And this is where, we talked more about SROs. So we talked a lot about school shootings and other gun violence. We looked at the Washington Post study. They studied all the school shootings since Columbine. They found that this is very rare, and so therefore it was hard to draw conclusions. But their belief is that SROs, they found one case, I believe, where an SRO actually stopped a school shooter. And there was actually some information in the report from an SRO who talked about what it was like to be in a school shooting. We talked a little bit about deterrence, and the data on that was also mixed. There are examples of a school shooter who did not go to a school that had an SRO and picked one that didn't. On the other hand, the 4 most deadly school shootings took place on campuses with SROs. So we need to add in the stats from their Washington Post analysis of school shootings, how they were stopped. So that's a action item for us. We talked a little about lockdown protocol. I don't want to go through it too much because I've since talked to an SRO and apparently we didn't understand it properly. So I'll be bringing that back to the committee. We had active shooter drills on our agenda. We didn't really go into it. All this information was on the agenda. And one of the things that we agreed when we adopt this report is that active shooter drills need to not cause unnecessary trauma to students. And in our appendix, there's a list of recommendations from every town for how to do that. We talked a lot about fights. It seems that different principals have different ideas about fights and when SRO shouldn't intervene. So we'll probably be revisiting that, especially since I've now talked to an SRO. We talked a little bit about bullying. The principals on the committee said that it's really hard for adults to stop bullying. So that's probably something we'll also address later. So at this point, we definitely wanted to get feedback and input from an SRO, and I did interview one, and I'll be reporting back to the committee about that. We have things to talk about. We wanted to talk about restorative justice. We didn't get to that in our meeting. We sent Priya out to do research, and she will be reporting back to the committee. And we need to make recommendations. We really didn't get to the point of making recommendations. We spent most of our time trying to figure out how it works now. And so that's our next steps, and that's our report.
Awesome, thank you. I will take this moment to thank all of the sub-task force members, the facilitators, and the report writers. I know that tremendous amounts of effort went into even just attending the meetings to get to a position where they could provide this information to us at the wider task force level. So I really want to be appreciative of all these sub-task force members who took time out of their days in the past 2 weeks. So I will now open it up for wider discussion. The motion that's essentially on the floor is to adopt the report as written. But now I'll move to, again, accepting discussion or debate. And if there is none, then we can go ahead and vote on the report. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, there's a little bit of difference in what I said in the task force. You said about adults not able to prevent bullying, and that is true. We can't prevent it completely. That doesn't mean we can't help it. And I believe I said that bullying is not going to stop, but we can do everything we can to prevent it. The other thing was about counselors. I believe you mentioned that there's a counselor per 1,000 students. Is that what you said, Marie?
Yes, that was within the notes. You said there was one per grade, and then when they have more than 1,000, you get another one.
Okay. So just me personally with Walters, we have almost 1,100 students. So we got one counselor per grade. So a lot less than that, of course. So that's the only thing I wanted to correct.
And for the benefit of the task force, we did explore that actual ratio, and it's 710 at the district level, assuming 35,000 students, which I understand we have less than that, but that's a rough approximation. Sal?
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to review the full minutes. I've been on the road all day today, but I know in the interactions committee that sub task force that I participated in last night, and the campus security, there was a statement about staff being required to engage or assist when there's a physical altercation, and I just want to confirm if that stayed on the report or not.
So it stayed on the report with a footnote to the source of that information. And then I believe I added a sentence that said, let me see if I can find that. Some principals want SROs to act as a safety agent. That was from your comment. And some teachers and staff feel uncomfortable doing it and they rely on the SRO. So I kind of tried to include everyone's point of view in that.
I just want to confirm that the statement that staff are required to engage in intervening when there's a physical fight, because although most of our staffs will, it's not required for any staff member to put themselves in harm to break up a fight. I just want to make that statement.
And if I may, sorry, go ahead, Samantha.
When Sal, this is a clarifying question. When Salman says staff, does he include SROs within that umbrella category of staff? So SROs are also not required to put themselves in physical harm?
I'm referencing to Fremont Unified School employees. SROs, when there is a physical altercation, that is something that's witness visual. They will respond to that regardless if an administrator had given them the direction to do that or not. If they see that, they will engage, but I'm referencing FUSD employees.
Okay, so according to they're basically, according to a law blog, they say that teachers do have a duty. So as I said, I think that's something we'll probably talk more about in the future meeting.
If I may add myself to the queue, as a member of the campus security sub task force, I did look into, and there's a concept that came up in other sub task forces, the idea of in loco parentis. Essentially, we entrust our school officials to act in place of a parent, and as a result, not only does that lower certain thresholds, even though they're state actors, they can act in certain ways that other state actors cannot. It also charges them with a duty. So there have been cases when assistant principals in California schools have walked by a fight between two individuals that led to serious injury, and walking by with their hands in their pockets, they were reassigned the superintendent of that school district. I think it was Escondido. I don't know why I pronounced it that way, Escondido. Did
It's Escondido.
oh, okay. Did
I used to live there.
did specifically state, the school employees have a responsibility to treat brawling students as if they were their own children. And then I would also add that school employees have a certain immunity as long as they act as if a parent, a parent would in a reasonable situation, for example, restraining individuals. And then lastly, obviously, we've heard from special educators that they do have to at times put students in restraints or in seclusion, et cetera. I would encourage some of the labor representatives to maybe weigh in on that issue. But so I found it a very useful conversation, but I did definitely have to disagree with Sal's points. I know I have Ganesh, and then I have Sal in the queue again. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the team that worked on this for looking at campus security more holistically. I see the sections on nurses, janitors, etc. And I was wondering if in your continued efforts, you are going to be looking into that in more detail, enhancing security through those services, because a lot of the discussion right now has been around what makes it harmful versus the areas that you brought up at the beginning of your report.
And so I'll allow the report writer to do a brief response because it was a direct question. Go ahead.
So we had a section on our agenda on restorative practices. We didn't get to it, and also we didn't really, well, actually I take that back. We did talk about it, but there was a lot of lack of clarity of what the district policy was and what was going on in the district. So Priya went out and did a lot of interviewing of people, and but it's not in the report because the full committee hasn't seen her report. Restorative practices is about prevention and how the whole school can keep kids from getting to the point of wanting to kill themselves, wanting to shoot up the school, getting in a fight, bullying. So yes, we're definitely going to continue to look at that kind of things. I don't know if Priya wants to say something.
I'm going to, so if she wants to get in queue, definitely.
Okay.
But I'm going to take Joyce, then Sal, and then Priya if you want to get in queue.
Thank you, Antonio. You had mentioned asking the labor reps about restraints. Our paraeducators are trained in CPI. Restraint is only part of a CPI training, so it's not only just restraining, it's de-escalation. BIPs and behavior plans are implemented. Staff is trained on those, and when we have been told that there's a student identified that's coming into our classroom that might need a CPI practices, the staff is sent to be trained in those practices that include restraining as a very last resort, but it's part of a broader training. So I just wanted to share that. And if you wanted more information about the district CPI training, I'm sure special ed department could help you more.
Thank you. Sal, and then Priya.
Yeah, I definitely agree and have seen that in process with special ed students. But I would ask Joyce, and I know there's a few SCIU folks here and a couple teachers. I can tell you the practice in Fremont is staff engaging into breaking up a physical altercation is not something that's required. And I would ask the units here, what is your interpretation of that? Has somebody told you are required to intervene in a physical altercation? Because I could tell you as an administrator, nobody has ever shared that with me, and I've been in the district for 22 years. Now, do I engage? Absolutely. But I know I have colleagues that may not because of size of kids. But I just want to put that out there to the units and ask them that question.
So if I could make that a motion, and not really a motion, but just if I could get wider participation, it seems like Sal is interested in knowing whether staff is advised that they should intervene in the case of physical altercations, and then more color on whether that duty exists. So is that something that, is a desire that's shared by other task force members. If that's something you're curious about, please raise your hand. All right. It's not a majority. It's just like, okay, there's more than, one person. Thank you, Sal. And so now I have Priya, and we have 5 minutes and 20 seconds.
Yeah, so this is just expanding on what Marie said. In our subcommittee, we had Mr. Herrera, who talked a bit about Circle Up and other restorative practices. Since we only had one meeting, we didn't really get so much in depth into it, but I did interview Mr. Zach Larson. I interviewed Dr. Stacy Bamford from Special Services, and also Miss Melsby, who's the Irvington principal, because they are they also are well known for using restorative practices, and we will discuss this further in our next subcommittee meeting.
Thank you, Samantha. Acknowledge the point of personal privilege. And then I had Annie.
Yeah, I raised my hand for two reasons. The first, I know we've gone back and forth a little bit about whether admin staff has a duty to intervene. And I just want to kind of flag that if something is legal precedent, something is a legal duty, it's a legal duty, regardless of whether it's not standard practice in the district, right? Even if people in the district and admin don't do something, that doesn't automatically make it not a legal duty. It might just be unknown for various reasons. And the second thing is it kind of perks my interest when I think it was Joyce mentioned that some teachers have CPI training. And going back a little bit to my comments earlier, when
I said paraeducators.
Paraeducators. Thank you so much for that. Going back again, when I noted that SROs don't have the same prevention training, I think, right, paraeducators having that kind of training is a way that they and other types of adults, other types of staff can make our school safe and should be the ones that are intervening and acting. They're the most logical choice to intervene and act in some of these situations, whereas SROs are not the most logical choice to act due to training and other factors.
Thank you, Annie. I have Martha in the queue, and then Greg.
My question is that when we say that the training happens, is it consistent across the profession and required of everyone, or is it an optional thing when they choose it? If it's offered, do people have to take it? Do we know what teachers actually have taken it? I don't need to know what specifics, but yeah, I guess I want to know more about the process.
So I do recognize that as a direct question to Joyce, someone who's able to answer it. Yeah, so if I could entertain a brief response, and we have 2 minutes and 17 seconds, and then I'll skip to Greg.
So it's not a requirement. Not everybody needs to take it. When a student is identified that is going to enter the classroom, that practice might be needed, or it was identified after a student entered the classroom. When the IEP team might have to create a behavior intervention plan, and then you want to train the staff directly in that classroom that will need to be ready to use those practices as it needed. I have been a paraeducator for 20 years, Martha. I have never been trained as in CPI because I have worked in classrooms where students and their plans have never called for it. So it's as an as needed basis. I hope that helps.
Thank you for keeping your response brief, Greg. And okay, and I'm going to take Glynis because she hasn't spoken, and then Sal.
I'll be real short. Just to clarify, Stacy Bamford is in the Student Support Services Department, not special ed. I just want to make that clarify for the minutes. She's a member of Student Support Services.
Thank you. And Glynis, go ahead.
I just wanted to add to what Joyce said. In addition to on an as-needed basis, there is some broader training for other special educators, including teachers and others. I am not a teacher, but a program specialist, and I have received CPI training in the district twice in 3 years.
Thank you. Sal?
Yeah, I just want to note, I respect and love the fact that paras are receiving this training, for elementary students. I'm not sure what kind of training would be expected of staff to deal with 250-pound, 200-pound kids throwing punches in a courtyard. Sorry to say, there's only a handful of us administrators that would even be able to deal with that, and staff in general. Not a lot of staff is going to put themselves in harm's way when you have 250-pound kids throwing punches in a courtyard. I can promise you that.
Thank you. And I would mention that the discussion is about duty to intervene. I'm going to take Malcolm. Go ahead. The time is exhausted, so if you could keep your discussion brief, or otherwise ask the committee to extend time.
It is duty to intervene is never absolute. The courts don't really agree on it. Different courts have different views, but there's always got to be some provisions. Like, is there a reasonable possibility of preventing harm? Is there a reasonable amount of time to take action, etc.? So it's never absolute, as simple as just duty to intervene.
Thank you. And now the motion, so because the time is exhausted, because we have an extended time, now we are brought to vote on adopting the report. And so the motion on the table is to adopt the report prepared by the campus security team. So all in favor of adopting the report, please, actually, go ahead and please turn on your videos. And to be clear, this would be adopting the report and its recommendations. So if you could go ahead and raise your hand if you're in favor of adopting the report. All right, thank you. Please lower your hands. All opposed? Okay. And then if anybody who is on video can put in the chat, great. Okay. So it looks like the ayes have it. It was around like 18 or 20 to 5. Yeah, unfortunately, Zoom would allow me to get the number exactly. And I don't want to take up too much of our time, but the ayes have it. So we're adopting the report as submitted. Now we can go ahead and move to the next item in our agenda, mental health. So I have, let me reset the timer. So this report will be presented by Jasmine Zartman, Glynis Mason, myself, and Martha Krieger. So if you want to go ahead and start, Jasmine, would you like me to share the report, or would you like to just speak? I would refer everybody to Exhibit D in the agenda packet.
I'm fine with just them referring to it in the executive.
Okay, great. Wonderful. So if we could just give everyone a few seconds, if you could refer to Exhibit D, that's the Mental Health Subtask Force report. And Jasmine, go ahead, take it away.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. So we're just looking at this SRO task force, mental health subtask force report. This is really just looking at the nature of SRO duties, or given the nature of SRO duties, which includes administering the 5150s. We'll get into that. Counseling students under the triad model described by the National Association of School Resource Officers, that's NASRO, and a disproportionate number of interactions with students with disabilities. The mental health subtask force is just looking at alternatives that we have available perhaps in the community to Fremont Unified students, and looking at a series of recommendations. So the first part that we'll just look at is really just definitions of the 5150 assessments. As many of you have probably heard this term, but to give you specific language on it. So we're looking at it's a Welfare and Institutions Code, 5150. And that basically allows an individual who's experienced a mental health crisis and danger to others or themselves to be involuntarily detained for up to 72 hours in a psychiatric facility. In the case of students, once a student's been assessed to be a danger to themselves or others, that hold takes place independent of parents' wishes. So then the next part is looking at who can do these 5150s. So police officers can do this, professionals in charge of an evaluation facility, a mobile crisis team, which is listed the different variations of that, and a county designated professional. So within Fremont Unified School District, we do have a check-in protocol, and that was a crisis manual that Antonio and some others were referencing earlier. So basically, before the student leaves campus, the following forms will be looked at, and that is listed on there. So there's various forms and check-ins that the school district does. And then at return, they also are looked at with the help of a school counselor, psychologist, or principal. And I have my little sweetheart here with me looking for attention. So I'm going to let you review that. But overall, sometimes the counselors and psychologists are not able to be present due to less than a 1 FTE ratio at the sites. Thanks.
Thanks, Jasmine. And so I'll transition us to alternatives to law enforcement assessments. I know there's been repeated discussion about police officers being the only ones who can administer 5150 assessments. And so I explored with the Alameda County Unit of Behavioral Health. I also reached out to the MET program. That's the mobile evaluation team. There's 3 mobile crisis teams that really serve our area. All of them are available to Fremont Unified students, and they are free of charge. So the first example is the mobile evaluation team, which is composed of a, sorry, let me see. It's composed of a uniformed Fremont police officer with a licensed mental health professional. I talk about its scope there. It has run into certain staffing issues. I talk about the hours. They're open 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. And they are able to respond to calls on an as-needed basis. I did confirm with them that if they are attending to another call, that they would refer people to the Alameda County of Behavioral Health Crisis Response Program, which is the next item here. And that's a mobile crisis team, which is a pair of mental health professionals, and they can respond. Now, to be clear, what a mobile crisis team is essentially you get on the phone and you walk through with them the crisis that's happening, and they're able to evaluate over the phone and then come to you to do the 5150 assessment live, right? And specifically with ACBH, it is a pair of mental health professionals, and they're housed in Hayward in South County. And then lastly, there's an exciting new program that's starting at the end of the year that will be serving Fremont, and it is going to be a mental health professional and a paramedic, and people will be able to call 911, and 911 will route the mental health crisis to the CAT program. And so they'll be able to do the 5150 assessment. Now, I would point out that a 5150 assessment is an involuntary hold. So to the extent that an individual refuses to get in an ambulance, or in the case of the CAT program, a modified Chevy Tahoe, then police presence can be involved. When it comes to qualified clinicians or mental health professionals, they will assess like what level of law enforcement involvement they would like to have. Sometimes they'll just alert police that something's going to happen. Otherwise, they can have them somewhat present, but nearby, or actually intervening and putting their hands on the individual experiencing the mental health crisis. And I will now hand it over to Glynis to discuss students with special needs and disabilities. Sorry, Glynis, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, so we just looked at some of the national data around students with disabilities and how they are disciplined more than general education students. And the Office of Civil Rights for 2011-2012 indicated that while students receiving special education represent only 12% of students nationwide, they represented 23% of the nation's students who received school-related arrests. Students with disabilities represented only 12% of the student population, but nearly 60% of those students placed in seclusion and 75% of students who are physically restrained at schools are students with disabilities. National data on arrests of students with disabilities by SROs, however, at the local level, Fremont doesn't maintain data of SRO interactions with students with disabilities. Also, the arrest referral data the district receives from the Fremont Police Department doesn't identify students with disabilities. As a result, district is unable to determine if the SRO program disproportionately impacts students with disabilities. In the case of students with disabilities who repeatedly demonstrate behaviors that make it difficult for them to learn, a school can put in place things like behavior intervention plans, which we talked a little bit about earlier, and those are designed to address behaviors. These plans describe interventions that should be implemented when a student exhibits identified undesired behaviors. And the goal of the BIP is to reduce the recurrence of undesired behaviors and support the development of the desired behaviors. So parents of students with special needs may believe that school personnel are required to follow the child's BIPs, but courts have repeatedly held that this does not apply to SROs. Even where a BIP describes behavioral interventions to be implemented in the case of undesired behaviors, SROs are not bound by its contents. Courts have repeatedly found that it would be impractical if a student's IEP, Individualized Education Program, or BIP limited law enforcement's conduct. Nevertheless, municipalities and local education agencies should be cognizant that they remain vulnerable to allegations that its officers were not adequately trained to interact with students with disabilities. BIPs are not binding on SROs. School personnel should proactively consider interventions that should and should not be carried out by an SRO prior to their involvement. So now we're going to talk about mental health professionals.
And Jasmine, if you could give a summary of this section, just so that we could advance discussion, obviously after we get through the rest of the report.
Yep, absolutely. So this is really just taking a look at the chart. I've gone over this a number of times, but you can really see kind of an outline here, what's recommended by professional associations, student per staff ratio, various school districts around the Bay Area, and where Fremont is at as far as ratios go. And so behavior specialists, they do not have an association with recommendations. There's various models. But currently with the number of behaviorists that we have, it's about 1 to 8,750 students. Down below that, you can just kind of peruse. There's various professional duties, just a few bullet points on each of those. I won't go into all of that. You're welcome to do some more reading on that a little bit later if you'd like. And this next part, I think, is someone else.
Glynis, on falling short.
Yeah, so we're back to talking about falling short and talking about those ratios that were mentioned earlier. So for example, counselors are able to provide one-to-one counseling services, and sometimes they're only doing that in extreme crisis. So we have much more capacity in terms of need of students, and sometimes students are even turned away because counselors are working only 1 to 3 days a week. And so that need is much greater than the counselors can respond to. For psychologists and behavior specialists, we have a backlog of students waiting to be assessed and supported. Specifically, in this time of distance learning, we've had that backlog because we've had the inability to do in-person assessments as well. And in some cases where there's no BIP or IEP in place, there could be additional opportunities for escalation and necessary interventions are not there. It means that district personnel are offered only half of the recommended CPI training in some cases, and then we're less equipped to handle needs of our students. For special education staff, sometimes it means that behavioral emergency reports, or BERS, suggest that proper CPI protocol was not followed by staff. Staff may have been injured. It further means more episodes of escalation as compared to de-escalation. Without secondary administrators attending trainings, little opportunity for accountability in the form of coaching or following up. For educators in general, it means that with less mental health resources at hand, educators increase their reliance on law enforcement to fill in the gaps.
Thank you. Martha?
So this next section kind of builds on what the rest of the team has already said to you. And it's really basically saying that we already have a shortfall. And what we've seen is an increased need for mental health services during the pandemic. for example, and we just have come out with a lot of data and information on this, but depression symptom prevalence in adults is 3 times higher during the COVID-19 pandemic than before. And I'm sure that we're all personally aware of this. And one of the things I want to say is the need for counseling only grows. So if counseling is an integral part of an SRO's duty, it remains a little bit unclear on why SROs were unilaterally reassigned by the city of Fremont to return to general patrol during March and April. So I think that if you look at the contrast of that, if resources have been allocated to mental health professionals during that period or someone else, that maybe they could address the counseling portion of an SRO's duty. And then students would have gotten the continued benefit of those through teleservices. And that was just, we really wanted to talk about that piece. Then in requesting outstanding information, are we ready to go over that?
Yeah, if you want, so the requested information that I think we still have outstanding is data on 5150 assessments that didn't lead to holds. We were unclear if the presentation that was prepared by Fremont Police only included those that did result in holds. So we'll follow up with the sergeant. And then we did get thank you, Greg. Brian Kilgore provided us the crisis response handbook. So we'll have an opportunity to review that starting tonight. And then we did get a response from Fremont Police Department about CTI, but not CPI. Greg, if you don't mind, we will finish the report and then we'll open it up for discussion. Martha?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, so let me just, so we were able to obtain information. We'll leave that to the members to review the information that we did obtain. And then we had a series of recommendations, which for the just sake of expediency and to open up discussion, I'll just quickly go through. So independent of the SRO program, we would recommend reducing the reliance on law enforcement officers to process 5150 assessments and instead entrusting qualified mental health professionals in doing so. And we've provided alternatives in the report. We would advocate for providing mental health support to students returning to school after 5150 holds or experiencing a traumatic incident. And so in line with that, we want to confirm that the protocol that's outlined in the handbook that we received is being followed. We want to adopt a comprehensive incidents reporting data collection protocol. I believe our task force disagrees with the recommendation of Mr. Bailey for FUSD to not maintain that data. It is important for us to do so because otherwise we can't track if, for example, SROs are having a disproportionate impact on students with disabilities because Fremont Police Department is not retaining that data. And we would recommend employing and training specialized personnel to de-escalate situations, increasing the number of behaviorists, school psychologists, nurses, social workers, and counselors in order to meet recommendations by professional associations. And that crisis management team should explore whether a student has a 504 IEP or BIP, and that the members of that team should be consulted or included during a crisis management. Oftentimes they're not referred to, and so individuals may not know that a student has an IEP when they're calling in for the intervention of law enforcement. And then lastly, to have the district adopt a community school model, which is both a place and set of partnerships between the school and other community resources. So first I'll go to Greg and then I'll go to Trustee Jones.
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question on the requested outstanding information. The first one says data on 5150 assessments that did not lead to holds. Are you talking about when the SROs did the initial assessment and the 5150 was not put in place? Or I've never seen this before, so I'm a little bit curious of what data we're after on this.
Sure, and if for time expediency, it just means that I believe what we received was that which assessments did lead to detainment within an institution, but we would be asking for which ones where an assessment was done, but it did not lead to a detaining. And no, you haven't seen it. These are requests that were created by the sub-task force. And Trustee Jones, and then Martha.
Yes, I'm wondering when it comes to collecting data, because I think it would be important for us to know data about interactions with our special needs students. Is data collected anywhere? Do we have any information about interactions with LGBTQ plus students?
I'll leave that to Mr. Bailey.
Data in regards to interactions with SROs or?
Yeah, do we know if there's a disproportionate impact to students in the LGBTQ community? Do we keep that data?
We don't keep any data that when the police have an interaction with the student. There is no data that we keep on our end. One thing we do collect, if we have a suspension and if a police report is taken, we will list the police report on the suspension form. But any other interactions with the Fremont police officers, we do not keep any data on that on our end as the Fremont Unified School District.
Okay.
Thank you. Martha?
I was just going to speak to the data on 51 assessments that do not lead to holds. I was going to answer that question for him, but you did that. So thank you very much.
Thanks. So we have 4 minutes. Sal?
A question for clarification. Is this sub task force recommending eliminating SROs to add mental health services? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I can go ahead and respond to that. You'll notice in item number 5, we are recommending the increase of licensed behaviorists, school psychologists, nurses, and social workers. In line with what you asked, outside of that, we are asking for the reduction of law enforcement involvement in 5150 assessments, but we made no such recommendation.
Thank you.
I see Samantha.
I don't know if this is the right place to do this, but I'm wondering if the mental health task force can get or interview mental health professionals in order to see the comparison of perspective and training between an SRO and a mental health professional. Because I mean, we're very grateful for FPD to have made us that video. Still need to review it personally, busy days. But I'd also like to see the perspective of a mental health professional, the people that are referred to in this report.
And just to clarify your motion, are you asking that the mental health subtask force interview and then present that interview to the wider task force, or that the mental health professional present after the mental health subtask force find them, present to the task force?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So would these professionals be presenting to us as the task force or to the mental health subtask force, and then we would relay that information over to this wider task force?
I think for the sake of time, the mental health professional would go to the task force instead of straight to the full task force. Yes.
Okay, so do I have a second? And I can restate the motion?
Second.
Okay. So the motion before us is to have the mental health subtask force find mental health professionals to provide us information on what exactly, Samantha?
Training, perspective, experience.
Okay,
anything.
thank you. Training, their perspective and experience, and have that presentation be done to the wider task force. Okay.
Antonio, I have a point of order. I mean,
Sure. Go ahead.
On the motion. Who made that request so I can ask it?
Samantha made the request and Annie seconded it.
Would you be willing to amend your motion to reflect it not be a FUSD employee, but somebody outside our system so that we can get it? Okay, thank you.
So I don't believe in friendly amendments. It belongs to the wider body, but is there an objection to that amendment that it not be an FUSD employee?
Point of information.
Go ahead, Annie.
Yes, to Joyce directly, what would the reason for that amendment be?
I feel like I would like a fresh perspective and not somebody who who's an employee of the district who can just give their perspective. Sometimes as employees, we because our experience are embedded with the students already, that I would just, if you're looking for mental health assessments or information to go outside the systems, outside FUSD, so we can. I just feel like that would be a more appropriate person to professional to go to.
So do I have any objections to this amendment? Samantha, go ahead.
Could we potentially do both? Does it have to be like either or?
So unfortunately, we've now met the 22 minutes. So now we have to close it and go to voting on this. So we'll
I
actually,
move to extend time.
all right.
By 5 minutes.
Do I have a second?
I second it.
Okay. All right. All in favor of extending time by 5 minutes, please raise your hands. Okay, please lower your hands. All opposed, please raise your hands. All right, any other people voting in the chat? Thank you, the ayes have it. So let me set the timer. And Samantha, you were speaking, so that I had cut you off because of the lack of extension, or actually, Annie, you made the motion. Do you want to speak?
No, I do not wish to speak.
Okay, Samantha.
Sorry, like the mute button doesn't pop up automatically. But I was just wondering if there was a reason why we would close it off between, I mean, my initial motion was for like any mental health professional. So the potential is that there could be multiple, one from the district, one outside of the district, because that would allow for more information.
So allow me, because I was doing without objection, but let me see if we have a second on Joyce's amendment, and then I'll entertain your comment, which I understand to be an amendment. Is there a second to Joyce's motion that the mental health professional not be an FUSD employee?
I would second that.
Great. So then Samantha's amendment to the amendment was that it could be both a non-FUSD employee and an FUSD employee. Do I have a second on that? Okay.
I'll second Samantha's amendment.
Great. All right. So we can discuss Samantha's amendment, or we can go to vote. Remember that we still have the Joyce's motion, then the actual motion itself to hear from mental health professionals and provide their perspective at the next task force meeting, and then we have adoption of the report, and we have 3 minutes and 20 seconds. But it all resolved really quickly if we get to the end of time. Seeing no one in queue, so the motion before you is to amend that motion to be that it can include both FUSD personnel and non-FUSD personnel, that it has to include FUSD personnel and non-FUSD personnel. All right, so all in favor of that amendment, please raise your hand. Please lower your hands. All opposed? All right, the ayes have it. And so now we are debating the Joyce's amendment, that is actually Samantha's amendment. Let me resolve this.
Point of order. I believe
Go ahead,
it's
Annie.
Joyce's amendment as amended by Samantha. So we would be voting upon having a mental health professional both FUSD and non-FUSD.
All right, great, thank you. So we are now voting on whether so Samantha's was that we could add the FUSD employee. Now it is FUSD employee and non-FUSD employee. So that is Joyce's motion. So that's what we're voting on right now. Go ahead, Martha.
Is it okay to stand in queue for discussion? Because I have a question.
Yeah, sure. You can ask your question.
So why is it that we're asking for a professional in this one area to be outside the district as opposed to the other areas we've been discussing? It feels a little bit like we're singling out the mental health professionals as if they have a personal interest in this. And I don't know, it just seems offensive. But I mean, I know that's not the intent it was given in, but I mean, we don't ask about people outside the district because I mean, it just feels weird. What was I don't know. What are we questioning here?
So Martha's, so because we are now voting on the idea of having to require it to be a FUSD and non-FUSD personnel, if that amendment doesn't stick, then we just move to the primary motion that we have a presentation from mental health professionals at the next task force meeting covering the 3 topics that Samantha discussed, just so that we know what we're talking about. Who is next in line? Sal?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think it would be beneficial to kids in the process, you know, as we go through, the more resources, the better. So I do agree with having both lenses. You know, I mean, Glennis and I have worked together for several years. We've had some tough circumstances with a lot of our kids, and we weren't fortunate enough to have an outside lens. And there wasn't a lot of success with some of the kids that her and I worked with. And just to have that outside lens, I think, to add to it as an additional resource.
All right, so we have exhausted time. And so I've written in the primary motion is a presentation for mental health professionals on the 3 topics that we've discussed. Right now we're voting on whether it should be both from FUSD and non-FUSD. Otherwise, so for example, if that's defeated, then they can be from wherever. If it's accepted, then it has to be both from FUSD and non-FUSD. And we're only voting on the both from FUSD and non-FUSD. So all in favor of modifying the main motion to include both from FUSD and non-FUSD, please raise your hands. All right, all opposed, please raise your hands. All right, the ayes have it. Now we're voting on the main motion, which is that we receive a presentation from mental health professionals, and that facilitation would be handled by the mental health subtask force on the 3 items that Samantha discussed, and that it contain both FUSD and non-FUSD personnel. So that's the motion before you. There's no time for debate. So all in favor of that motion, but there is, do people have questions? No? Okay. Go ahead, Jenny.
Just can you restate those 3 A's one more time?
Yeah, Samantha, can you, the three topics?
Training, training experience and perspective, I believe. Am I misremembering? Training experience perspective, cool.
Thank you. All right, so we will receive a presentation from mental health professionals, the facilitation of which will be handled by the mental health subtask force on training, experience, and perspective from FUSD and non-FUSD personnel. All in favor of this, please raise your hands. Thank you. Please lower your hands. All opposed? Thank you. The ayes have it, and so we'll have that presentation at the next meeting. We're now going to move to adopt the report. So all in favor of adopting the mental health subtask force report, please raise your hands. Thank you. Please lower your hands. All opposed? Thank you. The ayes have it. So we can now move on to the, just one second, data subtask force. And so I'll set the timer again. And I believe that is from Samantha, Ty, and Abina. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, so I wanted to first thank Greg and everyone at FUSD that kind of helped us at the data task force to collect data, although we are still missing some. Due to this lack of local data, we did decide as a sub-task force that we did need to utilize local, state, county, and national data. We also did set a precedent that we really want to effectively evaluate the SRO program by using empirical data, just because that is how programs relatively should be assessed. Take the emotion out of it, especially in such a hot topic, and just rely on the evidence. So just a general overview of how, like, the methodology. We started with a list of guiding questions and then compiled data from various sources. And you can see all the sources that we've compiled thus far in our report, separated by local, state, national, and then one study from Canada, which is not, doesn't fit into those nice little categories. I'll hand it off to Ty to give us some more information on this data report. Sorry.
Sorry, Ty, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Samantha. And I do want to also thank everyone on the subcommittee task force. I think there was a lot of diversity and thought. Hearing from Sal, at least personally as a parent, was very helpful. And Malcolm, his concerns from the community and teachers like Samantha, it really helped me as a parent to be able to appreciate, everyone really concerned about this issue. And, it reassured me, for example, that Sal really wants to have the best interests of the kids at heart. And so it helped contextualize a lot of the data that we were collecting and help have a rich conversation with that. And I think our data subcommittee, as well as all the other subcommittees, are a pretty good representation of the community. So I'm really thankful for that. And so on to what we did collect and what we asked for. We, of course, I think we can all agree that the local data, if we had Fremont collected data representing, the students and interactions, I think that's the most vital and the most persuasive data, because it's what's happening to our kids and the students in the district. But without that, I think it is important, as Samantha iterated, that we have data to contextualize it. And so I think we did a pretty good job with trying to obtain and open it up for all the subcommittee members to add as much data as they and resources for the other subcommittees to consider as much as possible. So, we did include a lot of local data, and we'll, thank Greg Bailey and Sal for including some of that stuff that we asked for, as well as the other committee members who added state research, national. I think we also have a Canada article in there. And so just to reemphasize what Samantha said, the committee really feels strongly about having good data, because letting the data kind of guide us. The color of having a conversation in the subcommittee and in this task force is really important, but really understanding and having the lens of what's happening on the ground is really important. Let's go to the report a little bit. Okay. So in the report, to get the data, we asked for, we used some of the data that we already got from the SRO committee, like Greg Bailey's presentation in July, but it became evident that there were pieces of that missing that may be more easily be able to produce. Like it became clear that there were 150 interactions that were excluded, maybe because they weren't easily categorized. But even if they're not easily categorized, having the data in general, excluding any type of protected information, would be great to be able to have a purview, because it represents a big proportion of the actual data that was analyzed in that July report. And then also having just the Excel file that populated those graphics would really be helpful as well for the other committees. And again, this committee is not trying to make any conclusions. It just wants to collect that data as a resource for the other committees. And I think I will hand it off to Abina, who will talk about recommendations.
Thank you for that. So I just wanted to essentially echo what Samantha and Ty said. This is truly a collaborative effort, and as a result of the data that we collected, it's from a wide spectrum of sources. And it's really important to remember that it's essential to assess this program with an evidence-based lens. Therefore, our recommendations align with that philosophy. So our first one is that Fremont Unified School District should collect and retain comprehensive data on how their student body interacts with SROs and law enforcement. This data should be categorized by things such as socioeconomic status, disability, gender, and race. Additionally, it's important to capture the full scope of student interactions within FUSD and their staff. Therefore, the district should distribute the Gen Up survey utilizing the same channels used to distribute the SURF 40 survey. The goal should be to maximize public input to provide a full picture. Ty and Samantha, did I miss anything?
Thank you, Data Sub Task Force. Is that does that conclude the presentation on the report? Awesome. So I'll open it up now for wider discussion, and we have 15 minutes left. Ganesh?
Yeah, I just wanted to, thank you. Just wanted to point out that while a lot of the discussion probably or the report focuses on numbers and specific data, I was really interested to see that some reports that covered state and national were included, which I actually had a chance to glance through, like the how California school policies fail to protect and serve was an interesting one, and the effects of police violence on inner city students. So it was good to get that kind of information also captured in here to get a sort of reported perspective on things, not just pure numbers. So thank you for doing that and adding that in.
Samantha?
This isn't in the report, but I was doing a lot of reflection, thinking about specifically, I'm also on the interactions task force, so I guess this is insider information. But thinking about how admin interacts with SROs in terms of, because they have a perspective that we don't necessarily see in the data. So potentially creating a survey for administrators to then take. I know another thing to add to that list of things to do, but I think it's super important to see when they are kind of sending SROs into the fold, how many times that they witness potential interactions that would require an SRO, et cetera. And if anyone would be interested in helping formulate that, I think, or if that is something that we think is necessary or valuable, I would love to hear back. And also touching on that we are mainly focusing on qualitative data, but we will quantitative data, sorry. Right now we're focusing a lot on quantitative data, but I also see the power of qualitative data. So student testimony, I got a chance to read through public comment, and it was wonderful hearing so many students come out and share with us their personal stories. And so thank you to all of the individuals that shared that with us. And kind of the power of testimony, because again, the students are the ones that are interacting largely with the SROs that are affected. And I just want to say thank you and say that there's power in that.
Brian?
Yeah, and I thank you for saying that, Samantha. That's huge. I think we definitely should do a survey for all elementary and secondary principals, because every SRO in the secondary area, sorry, in each like Kennedy, each attendance area, they are there, whether it's elementary, whether it's junior high, middle school, or high school. So it would be great to get their response. And just like Sal and I say quite a bit, we're there for the students. And if we feel like SROs are not there for the students, that will reflect in the survey.
So should I take that as a motion in a second, or should I take that as people who are interested in assisting Samantha in creating the survey and then working with Greg to distribute it to APs and principals can do so. How would you like me to interpret this request? So are people going to yeah, so just 1 second. Are people willing to volunteer to assist Samantha, or should we formalize it with a motion?
So I'm gonna motion that we do a survey, and then I'm going to request that Mr. Bailey creates a survey.
Seconded.
All right, so the motion on the table is that we create a survey of principals and assistant principals, and that it be administered by Mr. Bailey.
I would like to amend this motion.
Sorry, just a second. I had a hand up from Samantha.
I just clarifying question because I heard two different things. I heard Mr. Weems say that Greg would make the survey, and then your reiteration was that we would make the survey. Can we clarify the motion?
Sure. Could you clarify the motion, Brian?
Yeah, let me just start with a motion. I think we should have a survey for administrators.
Right. So there's a motion to have a survey be distributed to administrators. Is there a second? Okay, John is seconding. All right. Now it's open for discussion or debate or amendment. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and, all right, we'll go ahead and move to vote so that the motion is that there be a survey made for.
Ty had his hand up for.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Ty, go ahead.
I would amend that to say that it would be to all FUSD staff. It could be open to all and not just administrators.
Ty, some of us have surveyed some staff.
Oh, I see. So there isn't an administrator. Sorry. Then it's question clarification. Okay, got it. Okay.
Do you withdraw your motion, Ty?
I do.
Okay. Samantha.
Can I amend the motion to say that this survey is made by either the data subtask force or by volunteers from the task force?
Great.
I guess we should go with volunteers.
Oh yeah, so you can choose both, but that would be unclear. So if you could pick one.
I don't know which one is better or which, I mean, I don't want to put that on the sub task force because I don't have their consent to do so. So I suppose we'll go with volunteers.
Okay. So the motion on the table is to amend the primary motion to have a survey of principals and assistant principals, and that the survey be created by volunteers of this task force. All right. Any discussion, debate, or amendment? We're voting on the amendment that volunteers create this survey. All right, seeing no, oh, Martha, go ahead.
In a practical sense, is there a time limit on this survey?
We do have to make a recommendation to the board by October 29th, so I would definitely advise the volunteers to please prepare it, if not for us, for the board, but I would recommend for us. Any other debate, discussion, or amendment? Go ahead, Trustee Campbell.
Okay, just a point of clarification. I heard you say that you have to make a recommendation to the board on the 29th. Actually, I think that's a task force meeting day, and the recommendation will be coming to the board on, is it whatever the next one is in November?
I can go ahead and answer that. I mean, essentially, unless we are going to be having meetings over email, that last task force meeting or whatever, last task force meeting would be the time that we would create the recommendation.
Okay.
And then you would receive the recommendation in November, et cetera.
Yes, but I just was clarifying in my mind that you were actually saying that you would be making the recommendation on the 29th, and then you will be presenting that recommendation to the board on regularly scheduled board meeting in November.
Yeah, absolutely. We make the recommendation, we create it, and then you receive it in November.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
All right. Any other debate, discussion, or amendment? Seeing none, the question is to amend the creation of a survey to principals and APs. And we are now voting on whether it be that survey be created by volunteers of this task force. All right, all in favor, please raise your hands. All right, please also vote in the chat if you do not have video. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed? All right, great. So now so the ayes have it. And now the motion is that a survey be created, obviously having to do with SRO interactions, that be delivered to principals and assistant principals, and it be filled by volunteers of this task force. So that whole motion is before you. Do I have discussion, debate, or amendment? And just for information, we have 5 minutes left in data. Sal.
Can you clarify field from this task force? What do you mean by that?
Volunteers would raise their hands at the end of this and create the group that would create the survey. We would probably either request Greg to provide us emails, or we would ask him to distribute it to the principals and APs. All right. So seeing no debate, discussion, or amendment, this comes to a vote. So again, the motion is that the that we create a survey to, whose recipients are the principals and assistant principals, having to do with SROs, and that it be filled, or that the survey be created by volunteers of this task force. All right, all in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. I would encourage people to vote in the chat if they do not have video. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed? All right, the ayes have it. And now we'll move quickly to volunteers. So I was mistaken at the last meeting. Quorum would be 13. So we should have, not that we're going to have 13 volunteers, but we shouldn't have more than 12 volunteers, not 10. But if you could write volunteer in the chat. Thank you, Annie, for reading my mind. I would appreciate it. And we'll cap it at 12. We'll give people another 20 to 30 seconds. Otherwise, I will request Priya to write down the volunteers.
Do you mind reading it out loud?
Oh, yes, sure. Okay, so we have, all right. By the way, this is what I love to see when volunteers are so eager to volunteer. So we have Annie, Priya, Marie, Samantha, Jenny, Malcolm, Abina, Elizabeth. I'm going to put you as an alternate unless you'd like to volunteer because you do have priority. How would you like me to read your point? Or
alternate is fine, only if needed.
All right, Martha and Sal. And let me count real quick. We have 9. And Elizabeth, I'll give you the option whether you'd like to join at your convenience.
Yay. Sure, I'll join.
Okay, so we have 10 people. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing the results of that survey. We now have 1 minute and 38 seconds. And just a suggestion, we could, for example, well, actually, if I see no debate, discussion, or amendment, then we'll just go ahead and adopt the data report along with its recommendations. Seeing none, let's put it to a vote. So the motion before you is to adopt the report as written along with its recommendations. All in favor, please say aye. Or sorry, not please say aye. Please raise your hands.
Mr. Berber Herrera, is that the data report or the interactions report?
The interactions report is coming up, so this will be on the data report.
Oh, I see. I thought we had that already.
Nope, we've just been discussing it for the 22 minutes. Okay, so actually lower your hands. We're going to do it again. So all in favor of adopting the report along with its recommendations, and this is from the data subtask force, please raise your hands. If you have no video, please vote in the chat. Thank you. Okay, please lower your hands. All opposed? Thank you. The ayes have it. And now we will move to interactions, which I believe, so if you could go to the agenda, in Exhibit F, there is a link. It should have given everybody access to it. Otherwise, I have my inbox if you could request access. So any people having issues viewing the interactions PowerPoint? Everybody's got it? All right, great. So I'll.
Where is it again?
I was just going to ask.
Okay, got it. If you go to your agenda packet in Exhibit F, there's a link. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Ah, okay.
Awesome. All right, and now I'll hand it off to Ganesh. Thank you for volunteering. If you want to walk us through, and then I would ask that you keep it to 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to try and share a screen because I put together slides, and let's see if that comes up. Did my screen show up? Are you able to see my interactions presentation?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. Yes.
Yes, fabulous.
Thank you. So unlike the other reports, we actually ended up putting together a slide presentation. So let's see if I can get through this in 10 minutes. First of all, thank you to the team. We met over 2 full meetings and then a meeting to discuss the final report. So thanks to everybody who took the time, especially thanks to Sal, who was able to provide a lot of perspective that helped us understand things from the school administrator's perspective here. On the interactions report, as a team, what we adopted early was the agenda was going to be that we look at 4 different types of interactions and then go to recommendations. So interactions between staff and SROs, staff and students, then students and SROs, which actually is a big part of this, and eventually community and SROs. And then finally, I have 1 slide on recommendations, and I think you'll find that helpful. So starting out, first of all, looking at school staff and SROs. The first thing we looked at was the employment status when it comes to SROs, and we asked for clarification on this. So it was clarified that the SROs are actually employed by the city of Fremont, and FUSD is not involved in the actual evaluation of the SROs. So sub-bullets there is that the district management does meet and confer with the Fremont Police Department, but is not directly involved in the actual evaluation of the SROs. I've also got a link here to the MOU that we have with the Fremont Police Department, and according to that, FUSD has no authority to appoint or remove SROs from school sites. So fundamentally, employees of the police department. We did get input from Sal specifically that as per school site administration, SROs do work at their direction. However, if you actually look at the MOU itself, that does leave the SROs out to free to act independently. So that's the employment status. And the staff's featured use of SROs, so when we asked the staff about what the SROs are used for, it's building relationships with students, responding to and acting as a deterrent to crime and physical violence, de-escalating situations between students, and also acting as a liaison between staff and Fremont Police Department in case of a lockdown. So these were feature uses that came up. What we noted in terms of the staff was the state of training of site administrators in working with law enforcement. And this becomes important when we look at, even as we go forward from here, that the site administration, who is responsible for the students at the site, receive little formal training, and there is absolutely no mandatory training when it comes to working with law enforcement. So that was something that we noted. The most recent training for site administrations actually has, some of the things that we've highlighted here, including the link to that training, had things like, what about the parents, independent legal authority of schools and police to act first and notify later. What is my legal protection under state law? This is kind of looking at the staff and police. What do I have to do if I've touched students? Largely, the issue here was that there was little training in terms of protecting students when the site administration is working with law enforcement, and kind of wanted to bring that out. So our takeaways from this section was that ultimately site administration does own the disciplinary process, but right now the usage of law enforcement is left to the complete discretion of the site administration. But we should resolve this with some kind of written district policy and protocol. So we are neither training the site administrators on how to deal with law enforcement, nor do we have written district policy and protocol for the engagement. So that was as far as staff and SROs go. The next section was staff and students. And I believe somebody here brought this up earlier, the idea of in loco parentis, which is that when we send our children to school, we are seeing that the school personnel are acting in place of the parent. And in doing so, the students are sacrificing certain rights as a result of that, because basically the school administration is acting as a parent while the student is at school. So in line with this, the idea that students are giving up their rights a little bit when they're at school, the staff should be receiving training to ensure that the students' rights are protected and not just waived in terms of law enforcement is considered. We were also going to look at restorative practices in terms of staff and student engagement, but we realized during the meeting that the campus safety subtask was already looking at this. We were told that Priya is doing some extensive research on that, so we basically decided not to get into this topic. The third one topic was students and SROs. And this has, I have about 2 or 3 slides on this one. So the first one was going into constitutional rights and when the students are at school. So the first one is Fourth Amendment, which is around search and seizure. School staff only needs reasonable suspicion to search students' belongings. That's kind of the situation, but in a normal situation, law enforcement generally needs to meet a higher standard of probable cause. So staff needs reasonable suspicion, law enforcement requires to be meeting probable cause. However, in California, and we had some cases that were brought up, SROs are held to the same standard as a school official when conducting on-campus searches, that is reasonable suspicion. So basically, we are reducing the requirements and actually reducing students' rights when these SROs are acting inside of the school campus. So this was kind of brought up. Also, the SROs can usually rely on administration handing over fruits of search, which means that the school administration, if they are using reasonable suspicion to search students, that can be handed over to the SROs, which again means that the Fourth Amendment rights of the students are being compromised in this situation. When we talk about the Fifth Amendment right, specifically Miranda, it's essentially unclear right now whether Miranda is required. So again, it'd be great if the board would consider offering students Miranda right through policy. And we've sort of brought that up that right now there are no written policies, so this all alludes to that. We talked about limits on law enforcement. This was a big discussion that we had within the team. And there's currently no policy in place limiting what students' activity could lead to an SRO involvement. The subtask force, we put together a list, which I brought to a meeting, and that's on the next slide. And we discussed what would be, this is a list of things that we believe would be not be appropriate or inappropriate to involve SROs in from a best practices approach. However, administration in the representation in our team considered that because SROs may be involved as counselor or teacher, some of these activities could be involving SROs. So that's sort of the discussion there, that there is a list of activities that we felt would not be appropriate to involve SROs, but we may get their involvement because they are counselor or teacher while still wearing the uniform. So this is a busy slide, slide 8. But basically what we have here is the activities broken down into 3 categories. The first one, which is district currently involves law enforcement for the activities that it's already involving law enforcement for, which include things like loitering, trespassing, etc. already. The second one is district currently could involve law enforcement for below, depending on circumstances. And then the third one is district generally agrees it is not appropriate. So we felt that none of these should be generally appropriate. However, right now there are some amount of involvement, and that's kind of why we broke it into 3 categories here. When looking at the interview and arrest policy, and this really coming as a parent into the discussion, what is the current board policy? It only requires law enforcement officer to show ID before granting permission to interview. There is no parental involvement that is being required. So I have here a link to the board policy as well as a snapshot from the handbook that basically says prior parent notification or presence is not required. So this was something that we wanted to highlight. And our proposal is the adoption of an example board policy, which we put together in Appendix A to protect students' rights with key differences from the current policy. So reasonable suspicion required for district questioning for alleged violations of law. If student is potential defendant of crime, required attempts to notify parents prior to district or law enforcement questioning. Give reasonable opportunity to be present for the parent. Site administration requires officer to provide legal authority to question student, like due process. Arrest requires warrant unless threat of imminent harm or probable cause. And certain practices should be put in place to protect students' dignity. So really, the goal is to kind of move towards written policy and a recommendation there for an example. We also looked at community and SROs. This was a very quick discussion. We realized that at some sites, SROs are encouraged to speak to neighbors in the community in a school environment to address things like balls hopping into a neighbor's yard, student loitering, student blocking driveways. They are asked to act as peer representatives for the school within the community. Certain community members are calling SROs directly to address their children's concerns. So, but it's not clear that everybody knows how to reach an SRO, but some community members are able to do that. And in general, there was mixed opinion on the subtask force, whether the SRO should really be involved in these kind of activities in the community, but we just documented what's going on, at least at some sites right now. So with all of that, move to the recommendation slide. Our recommendations broken into 4 bullets over here. The first one was to request the board, a recommendation to the board to adopt a model example policy that we've provided in Appendix A. So the Appendix A is a model example policy on district law enforcement officers questioning and arrests, specifically to protect students' rights. So that's the intent of that. The second one is requiring training of site administration in interaction with law enforcement. So as we alluded earlier, that's a gap right now, so we're requiring that there be training for that. Establishing written policies limiting what kind of student activities warrant law enforcement involvement and which ones do not. So again, there's Appendix B that you can look at to see that, but really it's about writing policies that say, here's the activities that you should and should not get involved in as law enforcement. And the last bullet point was that this was really for future work. We were not able to get into this, but the task force, this larger task force should determine, or it should ask the interactions team to explore, whether law enforcement personnel should be involved in counseling at the direction of the site administration. So should the site administration be allowed to or directed to bring in SROs when it comes to counseling? And this was a question that we were not really able to get into. So we'd love for either us be given more time to do that or for the task force to look at that in a separate way.
And
So
if I may, I would encourage people to review the appendices at their convenience. If you could cease sharing. Now, obviously, people have access to it under the agenda packet, but otherwise, we have 8 minutes left for discussion, debate, or amendment. So I'd like to start discussion. Thank you, Ganesh, so much for presenting. I see Brian and then Annie.
Thanks for the presentation. Again, I've said this over and over. SROs are not there to counsel. We have counselors and we have staff members that are there for that. The other thing is intent of searching. I tell my staff over and over, they cannot search if there is intent or if they are hearing from another student that somebody has a knife or some kind of tobacco or something in their bag, they have to notify administration. SROs are not going to search. Administration, at least in my site, can only search bags or any type of personal property.
Thank you. Annie?
Yes, 2 points. I mean, first one, right, if that is what's occurring at your site, Brian, that's genuinely great. But I would love for that to be a standard written policy across all the sites, so all of the students are treated like that. And I think that that would be a great benefit, not a harm. Second, when considering whether SROs should be at all involved in the counseling process, I would like to move that the mental health subcommittee be the ones that consider whether whether SROs should be involved in the counseling process.
And just as a clarification for the subcommittee, and then I'll move to Greg Bailey. Oh, actually, Annie, was that a motion?
Yes, so it was a motion.
Oh, sorry, I shouldn't interrupt a motion. Do I have a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay, so the motion, Annie, could you restate what you moved for?
Yes, I move that the mental health subcommittee investigate whether SROs should be involved in the counseling process.
All right, thank you. So the motion before you is whether the Annie is moving for the mental health subtask force to determine whether law enforcement personnel should be involved in counseling. All right, so that was properly seconded. So now we are moving to discussion, debate, or amendment. Sal.
Yeah, like I mentioned last night in our subtask force committee, we need to define what counseling means. That's a very broad word. I think when the task force had this discussion last, it was centering around SRO.
Your voice keeps coming in and out. Could you, I would recommend maybe turning off your video.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, my internet here is not very good.
No, if you turn off your video, it might help your voice.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what you guys heard or not, but I'll start over. Last night in our sub-task force committee, we had this discussion because counseling is such a broad term. what defines counseling? Okay. Taking away an administrator's resource that would have a student and an SRO have a previous relationship that would.
Sorry, Sal, you do keep cutting in and out. It was good for a bit, and now we can't hear you.
Yes, point of
Because
order.
did you guys hear that?
We heard you ask, did you guys hear that? But we didn't hear before that. And if I may, because point of orders do interrupt. Annie, what is your point of order?
Yes, point of order. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, under Robert's rules, the maker of the motion gets to speak it first in favor of their motion.
Yes, absolutely. My apologies. Sal, will you hold up and hopefully resolve the connection issues? Annie is correct. The maker of the motion does get to speak in favor first. And then we'll go to you, Sal. Annie?
Great. Yeah, I am speaking in favor of this motion for a few reasons, regardless of what we determine or think counseling is. We all have a general assumption and knowledge of what counseling is, and there's a large difference about whether counseling is a student of their own accord approaching an adult, whether that be a teacher, an SRO, or a principal, or an administrator facilitating, encouraging, and in some cases potentially requiring students to have counseling with an SRO or with a psychologist or with another type of counselor. And so I think that whether SROs be involved in this process, especially in an official capacity, is an important thing for this task force as a whole, and specifically the mental health task force, because they've already been dealing with these sorts of things. To determine, right, we have Brian, a principal, saying that SROs are not involved in counseling. We have Sal saying that maybe it's good for them to be involved in counseling. And I think that this is a really important thing for us to determine and hopefully have the district standardize.
And just to answer a question, and then I'll go to you, Sal. So I'm taking for and against. So Marie, if you're in Q4, you would go after Sal, who I believe is speaking against the motion. Sal, do you want to go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, right now we can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all I'm saying is once again, I would push back against having multiple resources on campus and as a site principal, or not being able to utilize that resource, especially if the SRO and student have a good relationship. Did you guys get that?
Yes, thank you, Sal. And we have 1 minute and 20 seconds. Marie, are you speaking in favor of the motion?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So the motion is for the committee to study it. The motion isn't to go one way or the other. So I don't think we should debate what the committee is going to decide. We're only supposed to be debating and deciding, do we want mental health to do this? I hope that made sense.
Thank you, Marie. Do we have any other speakers against? Otherwise, I'll close debate and bring it to a vote. Malcolm, go ahead.
Well, I think to pick up on Marie's point, it depends what this is. And to reiterate Sal's point, counseling covers a whole broad range of subjects. And if the intent is to exclude SROs from having the opportunity to talk as a mentor, as an advisor to another student, then I would see that as a problem.
And I would, just a clarification point, I did state in the chat that the NASRO's triad model involves SROs serving as informal counselors. So it's part of what NASRO advocates for. Second, I would just note, given that we've exhausted time, is that we were talking about counseling that would be at the direction of site administration, not at the student's wish or desire. So that closes debate because we've exhausted time. So we're going to bring this to a vote. And so the motion before you is that the mental health subtask force should determine or explore whether law enforcement personnel should be involved in counseling. All right, so all in favor of this motion, please raise your hands. Please also vote in the chat. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed? Thank you. The ayes have it. And now we'll move to adopting the data, or sorry, not data, the interactions report along with its recommendations. Again, because we've exhausted, oh, sorry, Greg, go ahead. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to say in the first recommendation, I want the task force to be aware that there is a process for a board policy to be approved. So it's not done at one meeting, it's done at multiple meetings. There is a process that the district does have in place before board policy is brought to the board trustees for an official adoption of that.
Yes, definitely. There's multiple readings and could potentially involve community engagement, et cetera. So this is the recommendation would be to adopt it, for the board to adopt it, but obviously go through the processes that it needs. So I will now take the adoption of the report. All in favor of adopting the report from interactions, please raise your hand or vote in the chat. If people could turn their video on or alternatively vote in the chat. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed? Thank you. The ayes have it. And now we will move to what I believe is the last item of the agenda. Yes, so it's a discussion on next steps. What I would propose, or is in this, it's a suggestion that we agendize another meeting of the sub-task force on October 19th. I can certainly speak as to why I would recommend it. I know that at the time that oh yes, if people could mute while they're not speaking, I'd appreciate it. Obviously, the sub-task forces have explored various topics to a large degree. They've explored what is, and they haven't had the time to explore what should be, or whether what is just right. And so I think another task force meeting would really allow us to delve into this issue further in depth. I would also reference the board discussions on the task force, where they reference potentially the need, as well as board members' points to the same effect, that the task force may need an additional meeting or additional meetings in order to really give this topic its due weight. Ultimately, I believe that the board would benefit from our exploration and further investigation into the topic. As I've noted at other times in this process, more so than the actual recommendation is the body of work and subsequent recommendations that follow it. And I think that requires this task force to meet. Of course, the sub-task forces are encouraged, and some of them have ongoing work to do. And so I would certainly encourage that to be happening as needed. And again, those sub-task forces are free to act within their own scope, but I believe it would be appropriate for the task force to meet one more time on the 19th. Alternatively, our next meeting would be on the 29th, which is 3 weeks from now. And we would have to arrive at our recommendation given what we've explored to date. So that would be my recommendation. Trustee Jones.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, when I'm looking at the calendar, the 19th is a Monday. And is that the recommendation, to meet on that Monday? Or
Yeah,
would there be a reason? Because I know people have different meetings that they attend on different days of the week. And if possible, it makes sense to me that we would look at another Thursday rather than a Monday. But of course, that's the will of the task force.
I think there are, so Marie, go ahead. Otherwise, and I can clarify too, but go ahead, Marie.
So I wasn't sure if that was a motion or not. But I would suggest that we do it on the 22nd. Because that is 2 Thursdays from now.
Okay. So we have a motion to have a follow-up meeting on the 22nd. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Great. And so now it's up for discussion, debate, or amendment. I would clarify that the reason I had recommended the 19th was that the next meeting would be the 29th. And so it would only give us 7 days to potentially, act as a result of that meeting. And so I thought it was appropriate to have more time to be flexible. Furthermore, I looked at the FUSD calendar, and it seems like the Budget Advisory Task Force meets at 3:30, but we would be free to meet at 6 p.m. I do recognize, however, that Thursday would allow us to have the same cadence, but it would eat up into the amount of time that we would have left to react to it. That doesn't mean I'm amending, but I did want to explain why I made the recommendation that I did. And Marie, go ahead. You're the maker of the motion, and I should have kept time. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that the Campus Security Committee in particular had a lot of trouble finding times when we could all meet. And so as a result, we were doing everything last minute, and that was with 2 weeks. So I feel like if we don't get 2 weeks again, it'll be even harder.
And I think Sal has a next step, but right now we're just discussing this calendaring. So I see no discussion as to this. So I'm going to bring it to a vote. All in favor of meeting on October 22nd as a task force, please raise your hands. Please also use the chat if you need to. Please lower your hands. All right, all opposed? Great, thank you. The ayes have it. Sal, go ahead. I didn't know we could vote in Spanish, Sal. You're opening up a whole world of possibilities. Sal, you're on mute.
Okay, am I up? My internet
Yeah.
it's crazy. Yeah, I just in terms of next steps, I mean, I think this the committee's done a great job gathering a lot of information. What I'm afraid of is I don't know specifically how, if we were able to capture, life with an SRO and life without. The other part is making, we're going to have to make a recommendation to the board. I think with all of this information, not quite sure if we're capturing exactly, giving them enough information to make that decision. And that's that's my only worry. I don't know. I mean, obviously we have, a little less than a month left, but I do not know if we've captured, because that's essentially what we're looking at. Life with, life without, and then what would it look like? And I'm not sure exactly we've been able to capture that as a committee.
Thank you, Sal. And I'll go to Ty.
I think I agree with Sal. We have this October 29th deadline that we'd like to have something to give to the board so that the board can vote in November. So I think I motion that the writers from the subcommittees work in parallel with the subcommittees right now to start writing the report and recommendation that will go to the board, and we can present it at not this additional meeting, but the October 29th meeting.
And just to be clear, Ty, would that report have a recommendation, for example, keeping SROs, modifying or against? Or would it? Okay. All right. So Ty's, do I have a second for Ty's motion? And if so, okay. Glynis seconds.
I'll second.
Okay, we got a third. All right. So Ty, could you? Actually, I'll try to capture the motion that the writers the reports collaborate, and sorry if I'm rephrasing your motion, but please correct me. In order to write a collective report in parallel to present at on 10/29 to the wider task force for adoption. Okay, and we have exhausted time, so we bring this to a vote. Ganesh, are you raising your hand, or are you voting? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just clarifying to Sal's question, and Ty responded to that.
No, sorry. You can only move to extend for time because we've exhausted time. So we have, like, it forces us to vote. But if you move to extend time, and then
I'd like to move to extend time.
By how much?
2 minutes.
All right. Do I have a second? We have a second. All right. All in favor of extending by 2 minutes, please raise your hands. Thank you. Please lower your hands. Also, please use the chat to vote. And please, all opposed. Ayes have it. Go ahead, Ganesh.
So my question was going to be the report that Ty was talking about, which we're going to be voting on. Would that address Sal's question of life with an SRO, life without an SRO? Can we request that the report address that as part of the report itself that we put together?
So I'm going to let Ty, as the maker of the motion, to clarify whether that's the case. Otherwise, I may interpret that as an amendment. Go ahead, Ty.
Yeah, I think my idea was that the final report gives a recommendation, or recommendations, whether, what we were tasked to do with an SRO, without an SRO, and any modifications to the SRO program. So that report would be all encompassing of that. That was the idea that I had.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and I would just clarify for the wider task force that we ultimately then have to debate, discuss, and adopt the report. So that would be happening on the 29th per Ty's motion. And Sal, were you raising your hand? And then I have Martha.
Yes, I would. I mean, I know Ms. Jones and Ms. Campbell have been on a handful of the meetings, and I would like to hear from them maybe some assistance on, or if they think that the task force has, given enough information to help with making a decision. I just think, again, that this task force has opened up a lot of eyes, and we've looked at it with different lenses, and a lot has come out of this. But from a board member's perspective, and I don't want to speak for Ms. Jones or Ms. Campbell, but are we on track to help the 5 of you make that decision?
And in line with what I've been doing, I'll let Trustee Jones respond.
So, I'm incredibly impressed with what has been done already in such a short period of time. With whatever comes, like with any committee or task force or that brings a report back to the board has a lot of discretion about what it does. The board could have a lot more questions and send additional issues back to this body to address some further issues. The board could take immediate action based on the recommendation. The board could decide not to take any action and not send anything back to the board, but say, have a broader discussion with the board at a study session. So I think you're on task for doing what the direction was when the task force was formed. But the board has a lot of discretion when this comes back to us to decide what to do with the information.
Thank you, Trustee Jones. And Martha, unless you move to extend time and the body accepts it, we have to now vote on Ty's motion. And so Ty's motion, are you doing so?
Nope.
Okay, so that the great. Thank you very much, Martha. So the motion before you is that the writers of the reports, the various reports from the sub-task forces, collaborate in order to write a collective report in parallel with the work of the sub-task forces to present on October 29th to the wider task force for adoption. So I'll now take a vote on it. So all in favor, please raise your hands. And I encourage you to also use the chat. Thank you. Now lower your hands. All opposed? Thank you. And the ayes have it. So that concludes our meeting and we are now adjourned. I just want to reiterate, thank you for joining us and doing all this work. We all appreciate it. And I think it's going to give the board a body of work to look at and it's a benefit to the community. So thank you again and have a good evening.